we're going to talk about NTFS permissions. Now, the first thing I want to say about NTFS permissions might seem really obvious, but they're only set up on NTFS volumes. So the particular drive has to be formatted with NTFS in order for me to be able to go into the properties of a file or folder and see the security tab. NTFS permissions are either explicit or inherited. In an ideal situation, when I set up my file servers, what I want to do is go ahead and create a system that's going to perpetuate itself. So I would like to go through and create maybe a public folder that everybody has access to, some folders for the departments, and then maybe individual folders, so that each person has a public place, semi-public place, and a private place to store data. In real life, it's hardly ever this simple, but that's the goal. Any permissions that I set at departments would be inherited at HR. And the reason that inheritance is great is I can go in, and really I would be setting up my permissions at HR, and then any subfolders that are created by those users are going to get those permissions. And when I set up my permissions, I'm going to grant the permissions to groups. So maybe I have a HR domain local group, and I'll give it modify. We're going to talk about the rights in a minute. And then they can go ahead and create whatever subfolders they need, and those rights will stay in effect. So NTFS permissions can be explicit, which means I actually go out to the folder and assign those permissions, or they can be inherited, which means I assign them at a parent folder. The subfolders inherit the permissions that were set on the parent folders. If I don't like that, inheritance can be disabled. I want to be careful with that. If you're disabling inheritance every day, there's some type of a structural problem with your file system. But if you need to, for a particular folder, you can disable it and then reset the permissions. If I have an inherited permission for that user or group, I've got to disable inheritance before I can set an explicit permission. Inheritance can also be forced. So if I've messed up the security on subfolders, I can go up to the parent and say force inheritance right on down the folder structure and reset all of the NTFS permissions on the folders below this so I can get back to a point where I know where I'm at with my permissions. NTFS permissions are cumulative. So my effective permissions, meaning what I can actually do, is going to be the most permissive of all of the permissions that I have. The only exception is deny. If I set up a deny permission, that's going to override any allow permissions. Explicit permissions also override inherited, but that hardly ever comes into play because if I'm going to explicitly set a permission for that user, I'd have to break inheritance. But if they've inherited something for a group and then I explicitly grant them a right, that explicit permission technically will override the inherited. And that's the only spot where you would see an allow permission override a deny. For practical purposes, just keep in mind that deny overrides allow, and 99.9% of the time, that's exactly what's going to happen. Let's say I am a member of this HR domain local group, which has modify, but I also happen to be a member of the IT group, and that has full control. My effective permissions are the combination of these two. And since full control includes modify, I'm going to get full control. I'm going to get the most permissive. If you're not sure what somebody's effective permissions are, you can go into the properties of the folder, and there's an effective access tab. They've changed the name of that tab with Windows Server 2012. So you can add them in and see what their permissions are actually going to be. Let's take a look at the types of permissions that we have access to with NTFS. Read permissions allow the user to open the file or folder. They can read it. They can't make any changes. List folder contents applies only to folders and lets them see the contents of the folder. Read and execute lets them open the file or folder and execute programs in that folder. The difference there is that when you execute a program, it makes a temporary file, and that would be permitted if they have read and execute. Write lets me save content to the file or folder. Modify is the same as read, write, and it also includes the ability to delete files or folders within that folder. Full control is modify, so everything above this on the list, modify, plus the ability to do security functions, which means I can modify the NTFS permissions and take ownership if I need to. So let me say a few things about these permissions. First of all, in practice, we really only give out 3 levels. Read and execute means that they can get into the folder or the file and look at the contents but not change anything. There's no point in giving out read without execute. Giving out execute is not a security issue. You also would not give out read without also including list folder contents. Kind of mean, you can read this file if you can guess what it is. We wouldn't do the opposite either. We wouldn't list folder contents but not give them read. So in practice, we just click read and execute. That means they can go in and look, but they can't touch. The next level up that I would grant is modify. Modify means that they can save content and they can delete content. The only difference between read and execute plus write versus modify is that they have the ability to delete. While there may be situations where you do want to give out read and write, hopefully it's not often, because I almost guarantee you, the minute you give out read and write and not modify, about 3 in the morning that night, you're going to get a call coming to work so that they can actually have you delete a file that they accidentally saved up there. Generally, we just give out modify. Full control is usually reserved for network administrators because it allows me to handle the security of that file or folder. So I can go into the security tab and adjust the NTFS permissions. I also can take ownership. The owner has the inalienable rights, which means you can't take that right away from him, to change the security of that file or folder. So if somebody got themselves locked out of a file or folder, as an administrator, I could come in, take ownership. Now that I'm the owner, I have the ability to change the permissions, and I can reset it so that we can get back in. So we'll give out read and execute if they can read but not touch, modify if they can do all the normal functions, saving full control back for the administrators. These are my basic NTFS permissions. There actually are advanced NTFS permissions, but these are seldom used. We try to work with the basic permissions as much as we can. I've been in the industry about 18 years, and I can't think of one example where I had to go to advanced NTFS permissions and I couldn't just use the basic permissions. New with Windows Server 2012, advanced permissions allow the administrator to set a condition for the permission. I'm sure that there's some advantages to this, but generally speaking, if you set up the basic permissions correctly, you shouldn't need to set a condition for them to get into that particular folder. Let's talk about best practice for NTFS permissions. Assign permissions as high up in the folder structure as possible. We know inheritance is going to make them flow down. I don't want to be giving in permissions, taking them away, giving them in. I just want to assign the permissions at one folder. Whatever the users do, they'll just flow right on down using inheritance. Assign permissions to groups, not individual users. If I assign the permission to a group, then if that person leaves the company, I just pull that account out of the group and I add the new person into the group. If I assign it to a user, I'm going to have to revisit the share. I can also use special identities. Special identities are groups that are created by Windows. Administrators cannot control the membership of these groups. You get into these groups by virtue of what you do. So for example, one of the special identities is the everyone group. Everyone is in the everyone group just as a matter of default. There's another special identity, authenticated users. That's anybody who's logged into the network. We use anonymous users for websites. That's anybody who hasn't logged into the network. There are a network special identity, which is anybody who's accessing that file across the network, versus an interactive special identity, which is anyone who sat down at the keyboard and logged in. We use the special identities when we want to grant permissions to people based on what they're doing. So I don't know in advance exactly who that's going to be, but I know anybody who sits down at the keyboard and logs in should have this NTFS permission. So NTFS permissions are great for security, lets us lock down files and folders. I want to assign my permissions as high up in the folder tree as possible, counting on inheritance to have those permissions flow down. I can break inheritance if I need to, but I'm going to avoid that if I don't need to. And they affect everybody all the time. So when you're talking about securing files or folders, NTFS permissions are really the way to go. Let's talk about NTFS quotas. First of all, it may seem obvious, but NTFS quotas can only be set on NTFS volumes. So you have to have that drive formatted with NTFS in order to be able to change the quotas. Quotas limit the amount of space that users can consume on that volume. And the amount of space that they're using is tracked by ownership. So whatever files they create, they're the owner of those files, and those count against their quota. If I have particular users that should have different limits than everybody else, I can make a quota entry and give them a different limit. So the boss comes in and says, well, everybody else gets 500 megs, but if you don't give me a terabyte, you're fired. I can certainly do that. When I set up my quotas, I can set either a hard quota or a soft quota. A hard quota will cut the user off once they've consumed their allotted amount of space. A soft quota just sends the administrator a message by putting it in the event log when that person has met their quota, but it doesn't cut them off. Users will expand their data to fit the space available. You can never have too much hard drive space. So if you set a soft quota, you're really not going to do anything effective. You need to limit them if you want to actually control the amount of space that they're using. You can also set a warning limit so that when they hit a certain percentage of whatever they're allotted, they would get a warning. Now, NTFS quotas affect all the files that that user saves to that particular drive. If you're looking for more flexibility with quotas, you want to have them be on a per folder basis, something like that, you really got to get into File Server Resource Manager, which will give you a lot more options. But NTFS quotas are great if you just need to limit the users on a per volume basis. In this video, we're going to take a look at configuring NTFS permissions and quotas. NTFS permissions affect all the users all the time. So even though you have to share out folders for users to be able to get the data over the network, you want to open up your share permissions wide open and then lock it down on the NTFS side. So let's go through and just take a quick look at some groups that we can use. So in sales, I have 4 users, Beth, George, Mike, and Sally, and I have a global security group called sales users, and they're all a member of that group. We want to use global groups to organize our users. We like to use domain local groups to organize permissions. So what I'm going to do here is make a domain local group and add my global group into it just to make sure I'm following Microsoft best practice. It needs to be a security group in order to be able to add it to the security tab. Now that I've created my group, I'm going to add in that global group. So my users are a member of sales users. Sales users is going to be a member of sales data, and sales data is the group that I'm going to use when we set up our NTFS permissions. Now that we've got our group set up, let's go in and take a look at how we would do this. So I've created a folder on drive C for departments, and then I'm going to go in and create a folder for the sales department. To adjust the permissions, we're going to right-click and go to Properties, and then go over to my Security tab. NTFS permissions are inherited from whatever the parent folder is. So the permissions I'm looking at right now are the default permissions for the C drive on my server, and that's being inherited from the C drive to departments, from departments to sales. If I just want to add something in, I would hit Edit, and then add in whatever group I want. The problem is going to come in because by default in the root of C, users have the right to read that. You can see how these check marks are kind of grayed out. That means they're inherited permissions. I can add in new groups, but I can't take away those inherited permissions unless I break inheritance. So we're going to go into Advanced, and we'll disable inheritance. Now it says you've got a bunch of permissions in there. You want to copy them, convert them into explicit permissions, or just want to remove everything. I recommend you convert and then take away what you don't want. That way you don't accidentally end up with a folder with no rights on it at all. Even if you did, you could fix that. So now if I go to Edit, these are explicit permissions, and I can remove them. We'll go ahead and add that sales data, and we'll give it the modify permission. These permissions here are basic NTFS permissions. So you can see we've got read, list folder contents, read and execute. Read and execute really is the bottom line permission I would give out. I wouldn't bother giving these two separately. And if we uncheck everything, you'll notice if I click read and execute, it pulls in list folder contents and read with it as well. Read and execute plus write, the only difference between that and modify is modify includes the ability to delete. Generally, that's what we give out. If you're giving read and write but not modify, almost guaranteed you're going to quickly be getting a call from somebody saying, well, I accidentally saved something in that folder, can you delete it for me? If you're concerned about people deleting other people's stuff, then you could go in and grant modify to creator owner, meaning if I'm the creator owner, I've got modify, which includes delete. And then the sales data people just have read and write for whatever they want. But generally, we just give out modify to the group and we're happy. So I've got my permission set up. I'm going to hit OK. If I create a subfolder, the subfolder is going to inherit those permissions. So let's do that and take a look. And you can see it's still got sales data. They got read and write, creator owner, get special. The effective permission should be modify. If I don't like that, I can change it. Now, what I've just done is added permissions further on down the line. That's not the best way to handle NTFS permissions. On a good day, I want to assign permissions as high up in the folder tree as I can and walk away. If I've got permissions that get added in at one folder and taken away in another folder, not only am I kind of teasing people saying, well, if you could hack into this, you could have it, but on top of that, it's going to make it difficult for somebody else to troubleshoot. If I do have a question as to what somebody's effective permissions would be, we can check that as well using the operating system. We go back into Properties, Security, and when I go into Advanced, you'll notice that we have an Effective Access tab where I can go in and specify a particular user. And right now, this is going to evaluate George based on his current group membership. If I wanted to see what would happen if I add them to a group, I could specify an additional group that they're not a member of quite yet and take a look at that as well. But let's just see what he's got. So based on my NTFS permissions, he's picking up almost everything. He can't delete subfolders and files, but he's got overall delete. He doesn't have it on the file permissions. He doesn't have any of the security stuff because we really just gave out modify. If I've gone through and I have added and taken away from the NTFS permissions further down the folder tree, and then I get to the point where I say, something's messed up, I really just want to roll it back to what it would look like if I'm just doing inheritance. You can do that. So we'll go back up to departments. We've made some changes at data. We're not happy with those changes. We just want to go back to all the subfolders have whatever's going on at sales. Now right-click sales, go to Properties, Security, Advanced, and this checkbox forces inheritance down the folder tree, assuming that I have the right to do that. So it's going to replace all child object permission entries with inheritable permissions from this object. It's going to get rid of all the explicitly defined permissions. Am I okay with that? Yes, absolutely. That's exactly what I'm trying to do. And that has gone through, changed the permissions at data. So if I go into data, we should not see the users inside there. And in fact, we don't. So we forced inheritance right on down the line. There's not much else to NTFS permissions. The only other thing that you can really adjust is if you go into Advanced. These permissions here are NTFS Advanced permissions. So I can go in and hit either Add or View, and then I can set up different permissions if I click Show Advanced Permissions. Generally, we don't work with the advanced permissions. They've been there since I've been working in the field, and on 18 years, I've never had to do this. But it's possible that you may have to come in and do the advanced permissions, so I want to make you aware of them. I also can set up conditions as well. So I could add a condition and say, well, if the user's a member of a particular group, be a member of any, member of each, and then I could add items in here. So here, whether they're a member of either sales data or sales users, whatever I set up for permissions will go for that particular condition. Generally speaking, you should be able to set up the NTFS permissions without using conditions, but it's a new feature of Server 2012, and it might be a little bit more effective. If I could go in and say, well, as long as the user is not a member of any of these groups, in that case, they can have these permissions. Instead of having to go in and deny those groups, I could actually set up a condition instead of doing a deny permission. Permissions are cumulative, so users inherit permissions from whatever group they're a member of, and we just saw that with George. He's a member of sales users, which is a member of sales data, and that's where his permissions are coming from. The only thing that would override that would be a deny permission. I could be a member of 40 groups that have full control. If I'm a member of one group that has deny, my effective permissions will be deny. On the topic of NTFS, we'll take a look at NTFS quotas before we finish up. NTFS quotas are set on the entire volume. So let's take a look at volume E. I want to right-click it and go to Properties. And then I'm going to click on quota. I would need to enable quota management and then limit the disk space to whatever I'm going to limit it to. Probably 1 KB is a little bit too small. You can set up a warning for the users. Now, at this point, what it's going to do is it's going to take a look. It's going to give them a warning when they get up to 275 megs. And then I would come in here and say, send a message to the event log when they hit their warning level or their quota limit. It's not going to cut them off unless I come up here and check deny disk space to users exceeding quota limit. If I don't check that, it's not going to do much of anything. With NTFS quotas, the quotas are calculated based on ownership. So even if they had 4 shares they could get into on this E drive, all the files that they save in any of those 4 shares are all going to count against their quota. So you probably only want to use NTFS quotas when you're making a volume, let's say, that has individual user directories. If you're looking at department shares, you would want to use File Server Resource Manager, and you have a lot more flexibility with quotas using that utility. If I do have a particular user that I want to give more space to, I can also make a quota entry. And by default, administrators have unlimited. But I could come in here, make a quota entry. Let's say George has absolutely no limits, or I could put a specific limit just for that user. So NTFS quotas restrict users to how much space they can use. It's done on a per volume basis. It's tracked by ownership. And if I need to give somebody a different quota, I can do a quota entry. And that's how you manage NTFS.